I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. We're back on another build series on this one's going to be a 70 Cuda. As you can see, this car is in pretty rough shape. It's one of the worst Cudas we've seen in this shop, and that's saying much. We're going to take it through kind of like we did the last Challenger build series, where we go through everything really fast, a lot of work, and show you how it's done. Initially, I wasn't going to film this car, but I think it's got a somewhat cool story, some good background, and we're using full Dynacorn parts that are already pre-assembled, and I've never used them. Most of the time with the Cudas, the Challengers, the E-body cars, we usually try to stick with the AMD just because it's what I know and what I build with. The owner had these parts before. I've talked to him before he had the car and collect them over the years, so we're going to put them on, we're going to see how they work, and it's going to be something a little different for the channel, and maybe it'll save a little bit of time, maybe it's something we'll do in the future, maybe not. I'll show you some of the things I like and I don't like about those parts, but and what I'm thinking. Like I said, I haven't installed them yet. I might change my mind after this build series. So this car, it's an early production 70 Cuda. You could see it's supposedly now, there's a lot of stuff I heard through the owner, and a lot of it's going to be, you know, research some more. But from what the owner told me, it was owned by an owner up in Michigan, a Jackson speed shop that had ties with the drag racing program at Chrysler. I think he did a lot with motorcycles and drag bikes is what the owner was telling me. It's supposedly a 340 4-barrel car with the 727 automatic short grip rear end. What he said, and he's still got to look it up, I haven't seen the fender tag on the car, and that this car would have been a strobe stripe car, but not an AAR car. So it didn't have the AAR badging, it didn't have the AAR exhaust, it didn't have the 6-pack, but it had the decal kit on, like I said, an early production Cuda. So what we're looking at on this car, it's, you know, we're lucky to have these parts nowadays, because I would say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this car was unrestorable. Looking around the outside, you could see that everything it's just rusted through. Nothing's going to really be salvageable on the roof, the quarter panels, the whole trunk area. There's holes just all the way through it. And then same thing with the other side. Looking under these quarter panels, they're just, the lips are rolled in and they're just riveted patch panels. Just whoever was trying to keep this car on the road, and I think it spent most of its time in the Michigan area, so that probably helps kind of show where this car was and why it is so bad off. That, you know, the other side matches the same thing, just I guess at the time when they couldn't get the quarter panels, and probably this car was rusted since the 80s, that they're just doing anything they could to keep the car on the road. Looking at the inside, it's going to need, you know, floor pans, toe pans, we need door skins both sides, and then that's not even the worst part, really the front end on this car. You can see it does have the wrong K-member, you know, it would have had the 2-piece rotors and stuff on it, but this was just used for transport. And what the owner told me, that even getting this K-member, this non-bent K-member on the car, the assembly up here, that I guess the frame rails are so bent that he had a hard time just bolting it on. So right away, we know with the patching, the reinforcements on this frame and the booger welds, that really before this even goes on the frame jig, we're cutting the whole front end off. That's why it's ratcheted on the lifts, because I don't want it to come tipping back. Obviously there's not much weight in the car, but we're just going to be safe, and we don't want to do more damage to the car than its rough life has already had. You can see cowl panel, minus the obvious dents, damage, and rust. I mean, there's not too much to save up here. Same thing even on the factory torque box, which is a factory torque box car, that it's just, they're all rusted through. So really, I guess it'd be easier starting on what we're gonna save, but we'll get to that, to the cutout point. As far as you know, on this video, the goal is to just kind of give you an intro on the car. I believe it was originally a red car. I believe the owner's going back with that. There's still some things I'm talking to on the owner, and we're kind of hashing out where he sees the car. So we'll get to that point a little bit down the road. The main thing is assess the major damage, because you know, usually we see these cars in better shape and we cut them apart, and then there's a bunch of surprises. The good thing about this one, I mean, this is the car that if I was going to buy one to restore, this is what I would pick, because at this point the bar's set pretty low. We're assuming we're going to have to replace almost everything everything on this car. So it doesn't get too much lower than that. So saying that, like I said, a lot of this will be cut off. We are gonna leave some of it on during the second video, the cut down video, just to kind of hold the bracing on the car, and you'll see how we got it, how we're going to mount it up, how we're going to brace it, and how hopefully it's going to work with these big pieces going in. Like I said, I normally don't use the whole front. We're going to use the whole front Dynacorn assembly with the shock tower, frame rail, and inner fender all built in together, and that's going to be something a little different than what I do, just in how my frame jig works. So I've been thinking about it for a week or two on how I'm going to go about doing it. I think I come up with a plan, and now it's time to execute that plan and slightly modify that plan as we go along. So like I said, on this video, cut off the front end, you know, get the car ready to go, and we're going to mount it on the frame jig. So what we have here, we have our frame jig that we just got done with the Challenger in the background, the 70 RT. That car is obviously on a rotisserie, and we're going to start the bodywork phase. So all the metal work's been done, everything's been dialed in, and so what I did, the Challengers and Barracudas are, the only difference is really in the chassis itself, at least, was the wheelbase. So there's a 2-inch wheelbase difference, Barracudas being 2 inch shorter, 108 versus 110-inch wheelbase on a Challenger. So what we got, we have the front K-member that I have off a very old car, and we built a couple cars off this, jigged into place. And then what I have here from the Challenger, since we replaced the frame rails, I have the marks for the front frame rail. This might be in the way of our lift coming down, so we might have to cut those and add those on there. Same thing with this one. That's why I didn't bother jigging up the other frame rail. And another reason is I know where the frame rails are going here. We have our torsion bar, which on that car, looking at the bottom too. So at the bottom of the car, the torsion bar support and everything are completely rusted out. So that's gonna have to be replaced. So these are gonna be crucial pieces right here. And what I did, since the whole bottom's rotted away, I added these, and I had them on in another car. Actually, I think it was a 73 in the back corner. We added rocker braces here. So we're gonna mostly brace this car up on the rockers since they're decent front, and I got them basically marked out right at the front edge of the door rockers and the rear as reference points. So hopefully the thinking is the car will sit right on here, be sandwiched between the rocker seams, and this will all be level straight, since normally I use the front end to mount the cars and the rear clips. But like I said, we can't do this because this car on the front is bent like, I mean, you could see the frame rails bent every which way. So that's an untrustworthy measurement. So once we get it mounted off the rockers, we'll take some measurements height-wise. I'll get the frame measurement out for the Cudas, the early model Cudas, and we'll kind of just go over and verify our heights, our distances are all correct. And then down the road, what we'll do, since it was obviously cut off and it's for a Challenger, we know that the Challenger, if this frame rail piece was sitting right here, this is for the rear rails as they come up, that theoretically this should be forward 2 inches, and we'll verify those off my old frame pieces that should be looking about 2 inches, and our frame rail should be, this is actually the shock tower cross rail, I'm sorry. So this goes right in the shock tower cross rail, and the frame rails will be about here. But that will support that. And then what we're looking at is, this is our rear. So you can see where I have it welded, our rear, actually it's backwards. So this is my jig piece for the back, that the frame rails and shackles will fit over here and here, and then we have our back for our cross rail jigged up. Again, this would just be 2 inches forward of the other mount. So if we cross all that out, we'll have our back mount, we'll have our rocker mounts, and then we could cut off the front and not worry about it. So as for the parts, I said we're doing a little different. This would be the rear, I guess, floor pan, rails, everything assembly. So this is a Dynacorn kit. They make sides to Challengers. They make a lot of, I mean, you could buy a whole complete body from Dynacorn. We've had them in here. I have some good and some bad things to say about some of their stuff. As far as these pans, everything's supposed to be in well-through primer. I haven't used it. What I don't like about it is I don't believe there's adjustability that I normally can get in this. Now, if this bolts in and everything fits good, we're good to go. It's going to save a bunch of time. We know there's obviously not everything inside the cross rail. Under here is coated and it might be bare metal. We've seen that a lot of times with the Dynacorn parts. But what this is basically, I went over this in the past. So we said the Cuda and Challenger, the E-body 70 to 74, have a 2-inch wheelbase difference. So this part number actually says it's for 70 Challenger. That's from the frame rails to here. So the only difference besides the trunk pan, and there's a difference between the 70 trunk pan and the 71s and all that, on the holes here. So there's going to be some differences on the car. However, in general, these will all fit together. The big difference on the Barracuda and Challenger would be the gas fill location. So the Barracudas come in through the back and the Challengers come in through the side over there. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, it's right here. Challengers come in through the side over here. So what we're looking at, the owner's gonna have to cut that out anyway. So I'll save him the template, or I might have to cut it out. Someone's gonna have to cut it out. So we'll save the template off the old floor to make sure we get it right. And we have reference Barracudas around the shop that we can also take if we have to, that straight car. So the good thing about taking a project this big, you know, and that car that's that bad, we're gonna jig everything we can possibly, but we have a Barracuda on site right now that's the same model of that I could take reference points from, and if we run into any issues, I'm not super worried about it. Like I said, I think this will work out good. I got some ideas. Stay tuned this build series. I know, you know, we've done a 71 years ago, and I realize we've been putting a lot of Challengers on the channel. So we haven't done a Cuda in a while, and I've never done a 70 Cuda build on the channel. We just finished the 70 Cuda, I think it was 3-4 months ago. But again, I haven't filmed the last couple cars. If you follow my Facebook, I post a lot more than that, Carthage Classic Cars, that kind of give you up to the time what we're doing. But like I said, unless they're really bad, exciting cars, I usually don't take the time and film them. But for you Mopar people and you Cuda people, exactly what the channel kind of, our first car that we recorded on here, stay tuned. We have a Cuda, 70 Cuda. It's gonna be a cool car. It's gonna be awesome when it's done. It's a Mopar. We got another car coming in the shop, I think this week, that we're also gonna film at the same time. So really the videos are gonna pick up. It's not a Mopar. So if you're a GM person, we'll say, stay tuned for that one. We're going to try to appease the both sides of the channel. So stay tuned. Let's get this car on the jig, mounted up. Let's get the front end cut off, the suspension off of it, and kind of do a quick inventory where we sit and take it from there. So stay tuned.
So the first thing we're going to end up tackling is to remove the rear axle and rear suspension. We're going to balance out the car, and since there's no engine or driveline in the whole front of this car, removing this first before we cut off the rest of the K-member and everything else is just going to make more sense so the car doesn't go tipping back even with the strap on it. So you can see right now with the rear shackles back here, all the bolts broke on them. They were just so rusted. I was able to get the one shackle off, but they're not coming out. So I'm going to end up prying them. When it comes time to reassembly, we'll figure that out and the car is ready to go home. But right now, the idea is just to remove the suspension with as little damage as possible. Same thing of why I'm not removing the leaf spring shackles on the rear end is I already tried to get them broke free and they're one solid piece. So if I remove them, we're going to end up buying those bolts too. The rear leaf spring shackles were already shot, so that was the way to go, just to sacrifice them, get everything out. As I said earlier, we're going to end up just cutting the whole front end of this car apart. It's going to be easier now, and eventually we will have to probably transfer the suspension from this front end onto the new Cuda's front end after we build it, but as of right now in the removal process and getting everything done, it's going to save the owner some time. It's going to hold everything together in one safe spot where we don't have to worry about upper control arms, everything else. So we're going to just take the plasma cutter, cut right around both frame rails, finish the job that someone already started doing on removing the front clip on this car. So you see, I'm not even going to unbolt the K-member or anything else. So what we ended up doing, like I said, take the plasma cutter right around. I'm kind of just, moving it, kicking it. And at this point, the only thing holding it in are the torsion bars. I'm lightly tapping. I'm not damaging or hitting anything real hard, but I'm pulling the K-member forward and letting the torsion bars come, relief out. That's not normal compared to how, you would do it. But then again, the K-member usually doesn't come out where you can pull the torsion bars out first. A lot of these cars get stuck, even jamming them up. So, and then I just ended up pulling the torsion bars out the front too, and they were really loose once they had no tension, and they came out really nice. So you can see right now we got the car up in the air, we got the jig, Chase is helping me out, and those two pieces I thought with the frame rail, they are in the way. So what I ended up doing, I ended up slicing around 9/10 of them, and I ended up just kind of rolling them over so they have the same exact spot where I know I want to keep them, and they're all lined up. I'm also cutting them at a weird angle, so in case they do break off, I know they're going to go back out that area, and that's keyed right, because not all these pieces when I put them up were exactly straight. The idea wasn't getting anything straight for those pieces. It's just to get everything situated in the holes. So we'll put them back the same way. You can see right now we're trying to jack the back of the car up to get the rear lift section out of the way, and the jack actually went right through the frame rail. That's how rusted it was on that one hole area. So we took a board, used a different part of it, suspension mount, the leaf spring mount, and the car went up. What we're able to do is kind of just shimmy it in place. I'm kind of just making sure the rockers, those four pieces on the side, they're really tight against the rockers. So I'm kind of just bowing them out just a hair to make sure it fits in. You can see the driver corner is not falling down on the front mount, and that's basically, again, the rear's too heavy back there and it's sagging. Same reason I didn't want to leave this thing on the lift without tying it up. So you can see once we end up ratcheting it down, it pulled the rear up, pivoted off that rear rockers, and now the car should be sitting 100% level. We're going to check this with a level gauge and just make sure, the best we could. I mean, the rockers, of course, obviously over the years have had people hit them, jack on them. They're not 100%, but we want to make sure we're within actual ballpark. And from what we did check, we are. So the problem we're having right now is getting, again, this lift out. The lift arms, you see, they extend out and they're in the way. So what we're end up doing, we're gonna actually just pull the pin on one of the lift arms, and then that will allow that whole arm to come out, and then we can just rotate it around the rest of our mounts without cutting anything else. That's gonna ensure everything's accurate on the car and everything's jigged what we wanted to off the Challenger. You can see now that the lift's removed, we're gonna go ahead and raise it up, and we're going to level out the lift. Obviously, this thing doesn't have a striker in the door, and the idea right now with leveling it out is now that we're going to check everything, this is where we're going to put the rest of our mounts in, and everything is going to be welded in and jigged up level. So then after the sandblast and removal process, when we go to build the car, we're going to put the car, it doesn't matter where it goes, as long as it goes level, we have a square platform to go on. So we're using a digital level gauge, running around the outside, just making sure we're within that reason. So what we did find out, now that everything's level, I went off the rocker to align it, and that piece right there, my jig piece off the Challenger. So looking at it right here, it's slightly off. So what we had to do, we had to take the monkey on the stick and just inch that area forward to, again, here we are, line up, and both of the jig pieces that went off the Challenger torsion bar and frame rail are now correct. So we're going to pull some string, we're going to double check everything else. Plumb bob and this car should be 100% straight. So we're going to start putting in some of the other mounts and tacking them where they're going to go now that we roughed in the car and verified that everything's pretty straight. Again, this is a good sign for the height on this Cuda, that piece right there, that was exactly how it fit in the last E-body we did. We got to remove the rear valance brackets, and then we're going to go ahead and put the rear jig piece for the frame rails and the shackles on. Now with this one, we want to get it on now because I want to know where the factory car was. After taking some measurements on the car real quick, I believe that this car has not been in a wreck. Everything else looks like it's straight in the back of the car. You know, we talked about the front, but from the torsion bars back, I believe that this car is squared up and straight. So what we're going to do, I'm going to put this rear piece in the car, and after that, we're going to go ahead and just verify all. We're just tacking it in. Same thing with this other, the torsion, the shock tower piece. We just went and we tacked it in. Once we get everything tacked in, then we'll go ahead and final weld the whole jig front to rear, that this thing will be permanent. You know, you're not going to be able to knock it off with a hammer. So we put these little plastic PVC pipe, 1-inch PVC pipe into the bushing area. That gives us a little bit of play, but kind of holds the resistance out there so we did knock the old bushing out. You can see the quarter panel down here is cut. We actually had to torch out the shackle. That's how tight it was. So I had to kind of cut a little bit of the quarter panel out to get the hammer in there with the torch and everything else. But we were able to torch out the shackle. This is important because this is set in our jig right now. So it's something that, even though we're not reusing this frame rail, we had to end up doing it. You could see we are going to try to keep the tail panel in this car. That's again going to be in the next video. But even this cross rail on the bottom, you could just see the cracks, the rust in it. There's holes everywhere. This car is just a rough looking car. So like I said, I got everything bolted in, both sides. We're working on the second one right now on the shackles, and you can see that piece right there works right off the cross rail. Now it sits down, I know, a 1/4 inch, and that was by design. That so when I pivot it in there, it doesn't bind up and lets us pivot this piece in and out. So that's the idea when putting this cross rail in. I know as long as we have that 1/8 inch gap, we're good to go. And you can see right there, we can just, everything's level across the back. Our shackles are holding it up, so we know our cross rail's good on that. At this point, we're going to go through and follow up on our frame measurements. I'm looking them up actually on my phone. Usually we have a printer right now that's down, but we're just looking up our frame measurements. I also took frame measurements off the Challenger to verify our torsion bar support and our K-member are correct. Again, everything on this jig so far was showing us that we were correct based on our numbers and everything else, and where our rockers were and all that, and our measurements in the back. What I want to do though, we need to verify this by an actual measurement, because this is important. Once we jig this car up, that K-member in the front doesn't move. Those frame rails, we have to know that when we bolt them in that K-member, they're gonna fit. Once we verify everything fits and everything's good to go, I'm gonna go through this jig front to rear, make a couple more small pieces, and weld everything solid.
All right, we're going to wrap up this video on the 70 Cuda build. Obviously, we did what I initially wanted to. We did the intro of the car, a quick walk around to see how bad it is. On the next video, we're going to start the teardown process and cutting all the rust out. So a lot more of how bad this car is will really kind of come to light. You could see the goal of this video, which we did, was an intro and to mount it on the frame jig. As you could see, the frame jig, our jig pieces were worked out really well off our other builds. Like I said, I cut them off because the Challengers are 2 inches longer than the Cudas and Barracudas, and you could see looking at these mounts back here, it was about exactly 2 inches, and I kind of had the level gauge sticking up to make sure they're all level. And what I do with these frame jigs, like there's no, like yes, I build a lot of E-bodies on this jig. We have a permanent K-member on it, and we got these certain jig points that always stay on here. What I like to do though, we added these pieces on the rockers. I like to kind of customize the jig for the build. Obviously, each one of these cars are different. Some cars need more than others. If this car just needed a floor pan and the frame rails were fine, our jig points would be a lot different and we'd probably need a lot less of them. Same thing with the front end. You know, with this piece right here, it worked out really well where we cut it and you know the lift was in the way. That's the only problem, not having a true 2-post lift where we can get on the sides with no clearance issues, but we adapt and overcome. We did it with that lift, and you could see this side, the rocker, we had it where the Challenger was, but what it is the rockers aren't always 100% correct. You know, for that reason, some get moved in and out. So that's 1/16 of an inch once we move that forward, and that's why I also always jig up off the torsion support. The torsion support and the frame reference points are the keys to mounting the car on the jig and getting everything straight. That's gonna go off the front K-member, which goes off the wheel. So we know this car, from back here in these shackle mounts to that K-member, everything should be straight and is right and squared. You know, if the rocker's off, forward, back a little bit, if you've seen other videos of mine, we'll move the rockers around just to get better gaps here or there. So the factory does the same thing. So like I said, the rockers are good reference points to start off, and probably the only thing that's going to be left when we cut the whole bottom frame out of this thing. Also, on my jig mounts, the shackles are bolted in. The top of these mounts, everything except the rockers, including the torsion bar, you could see nothing's welded. I know because the only thing I welded on this car are the rockers, because when we cut it all apart, obviously us welding it together wouldn't make too much sense. When we got to remove the old parts, we're just cutting our weld. So I have it tight up against everything as a reference point that we sit down. I try to put our square pieces right in line with the frame rails, and I know where everything goes. So when we put the new pieces on, everything should just be our reference. And then after the new car's together, as I'm doing it, I always take the tram out and we're gonna verify all these measurements. It's not like that's the only time we put it on the frame jig. We verify everything straight. If something isn't straight, we adjust accordingly. And then as the build process happens, we keep adjusting accordingly just to make sure everything's good. So like I said, next video we'll be cutting up. You know, it was a whole lot easier, as bad as this front K-member was, as the old K-member was, to just hack the whole car off. There's no way it would have fit on here. It would have just been in the way, and so it wasn't even worth unbolting it. So like I said, I think this is our good reference point. Might have to jig up some others, but the reason I didn't is normally when I do frame rails, I would build these pieces and everything else. The problem is I have the whole assembly, and I like to usually just put the frame rails in first. Well, I can't do that, so I think the frame rails are gonna kind of have to come in through the side, like I said, adjusting a build quality. The suspension, everything came off pretty good. You gotta love the old 80s air shocks that, you know, probably look better in the traction bars than they work. So all in all, this is the new build on the channel, one of them. So follow along if you like this kind of stuff. If you're not into Mopars, I mean, check back. We'll put another car on there, like I said in the beginning of the video, in a week or two when it's arriving, hopefully here next day or two. So check back on that. We'll start building that car. I think we're going to film that one. That's another pretty bad one, different model. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us out in the algorithm. It helps get the word out so we can get these cool cars. You know, I'm not a YouTuber. I don't make my living on YouTube, but we do build cars. So it really helps us get the worst of the worst, the cool cars come in here so we can film them, throw it out, put them out to you. So please like, comment, subscribe again to our channel. That does help us. And on the next video, like I said, we'll start cutting this thing up. We'll have more to come on this one. This will be like, all our videos are gonna just be up fast pace and just work, build, and hopefully they help you out. If you just like cars and you wanna see how they're built, this is how it's done. So I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. Stay tuned for the next video and we'll see you next time. Bye.